78 million pounds. That is how much invasive fish has been dragged out of the Illinois River over the last 15 years. Not by a single machine, not by a billion-dollar dam, by commercial fishermen getting paid by the pound to haul net after net of carp out of the water. And here is the part that makes that number land differently. Before those crews started, a single kilometer of the central Illinois River held more than 1,200 invasive carp packed into the channel. In some stretches, 70% of every fish in the water by weight was carp. The native species that had lived there for centuries were being starved out one spawning season at a time. Today, in the upper reaches of that same river, near a place called Starved Rock, the carp are disappearing. Populations in the uppermost navigation pools have dropped so sharply that scientists at the Illinois Natural History Survey are now measuring the recovery of zooplankton, the tiny organisms the carp had been stripping from the water for decades. Something is working. But the thing that is working is not what most people were told, and the thing most people were told makes a much better story, which is exactly why it stuck. I am Simon. This is what is really happening on the Illinois River. To understand why the carp are vanishing now, you first have to understand how they took the river in the first place. Go back to the 1970s. Fish farmers across the American South had a basic problem. Their ponds kept filling with algae. So they imported a fish from East Asia that eats algae all day long, the silver carp. Drop a handful into a retention pond and the water stays clean. Simple, cheap, effective. Then the fish escaped. Floods, accidental releases, maybe both. The carp slipped out of those ponds, found open waterways, and within about a decade, they were breeding freely in the Mississippi River basin. From there, they pushed north, up the Mississippi, into the Illinois River, and kept climbing. These are not ordinary fish. A single female silver carp can release hundreds of thousands of eggs in one spawning season. Some estimates put the number above 1 million. Now picture every female in the river doing the same thing season after season. The math gets out of control fast. And they eat constantly. A silver carp swims with its mouth open, filtering plankton straight out of the water column. Plankton is the base of the entire food chain. Every native fish in the river depends on it, from newborn fry up to full-grown bass. The carp get to it first, and everything above them in the food chain starts running out of food. You can measure exactly what that did. Take the gizzard shad, a native fish that feeds on the same plankton. Bass and catfish eat the shad. The whole river food web runs on them. Once the carp moved in, the shad began shrinking in size and declining in numbers because the carp were eating their food before the shad could reach it. Same story for the bigmouth buffalo, another native. Both went into steady decline. The carp were not hunting anything. They were just eating first, eating more, and eating everything. Give that a few years, and the river belongs to them. Pull a net in the central Illinois River during those peak years, and what comes up is carp after carp after carp, and maybe one native fish at the bottom of the pile. And the silver carp does something else. It flies. A passing boat motor startles it, and a fish weighing 10 pounds or more rockets straight up out of the water, sometimes as high as 10 feet. You are doing 30 miles an hour down the river, and something the size of a bowling ball is coming at your face. Federal agencies kept records of what these fish do to people. Black eyes, broken noses, broken bones, deep cuts from the fins, concussions. Boaters have been knocked flat in their own boats by a fish they never saw coming. Now here is why this could not stay an Illinois problem. The Illinois River runs north toward Chicago and connects through a man-made canal straight into Lake Michigan. Lake Michigan is one of the 5 Great Lakes, drinking water for roughly 40 million people across 8 states and parts of Canada. The Great Lakes fishery, commercial, recreational, and tribal combined, is valued at more than $5 billion a year, according to the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. Let the carp reach that water and settle in, and they would do to the lakes what they did to the Illinois River. Strip the plankton, collapse the food web, and take over. So people threw everything at the door. In 2002, the Army Corps of Engineers sank the first electric dispersal barrier into the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal near Romeoville, about 37 miles from Lake Michigan. The idea was straightforward. Run a current through steel electrodes bolted to the canal floor and shock any fish that tries to swim through. 2 more barriers followed at the same site, and a 4th was added later with triple the power of the original. The electrodes span 160 feet of canal, 27 feet deep, pulsing 2.3 volts per inch every few milliseconds. Nothing lives in that stretch of water except insects and bacteria. The canal is flanked by industrial plants and refineries. It is not a place anyone would swim. It is a place built to stop fish, and for the most part, It has. But electric barriers have limits. The canal is a working shipping channel. Heavy barges push through it every day, and a large vessel creates a turbulent wake that can carry small fish past the electrical field before the current can turn them. A power outage, even a brief one, opens the door entirely. Maintenance windows require shutdowns, and the barriers do nothing to address the carp breeding in the hundreds of miles of river down. They hold the line at one narrow choke point, but they do not shrink the army behind it. That is where the bigger plan came in. In 2015, Congress identified Brandon Road Lock and Dam on the Des Plaines River near Joliet, about 50 miles from Lake Michigan, as the site for an advanced multi-layer barrier. The design stacks an electric field, a wall of compressed air bubbles, underwater speakers blasting frequencies that drive carp away, and a flushing lock system that can purge fish from the chamber before a barge passes through. Illinois, Michigan, and the Army Corps signed a project partnership agreement in July 2024. The federal government would cover 90% of construction costs. The first contract, $15.5 million for site prep and riverbed rock removal, was finished in 2025. A second contract, worth roughly $113 8 million days for the leading-edge deterrent technologies, was awarded. Construction had finally started. Then it stopped. On July 24, 2026, the Army Corps issued a stop work order on the entire Brandon Road project. The agency confirmed the halt, but declined to explain why, who was conducting the review, or how long it would last. This came after a previous administrative review had already paused progress from December 2025 through April 2026. Members of Congress from multiple Great Lakes states pushed back immediately, calling the project a critical line of defense. The Alliance for the Great Lakes issued a statement urging the Corps to resume construction, warning that invasive carp are not going to wait for bureaucratic reviews to finish. As of today, the project sits idle. The fish do not know that. Meanwhile, the carp are still in the river and still breeding. One female can drop over 1 million eggs in a single season. No wall changes that number. No electric field reaches that far south. And yet, in the upper Illinois River near Starved Rock, something has been shifting. Carp populations in the uppermost navigation pools have been falling year after year, enough that biologists are now seeing a measurable recovery in the zooplankton those fish had been consuming. The change is real. The question is what caused it. If you are finding this useful, hit subscribe. We cover water systems, infrastructure stories, and the real data behind the headlines every week with the full picture you need to actually follow what is happening. A few years back, the most popular answer to that question was a fish. A very old, very large, very photogenic fish called the alligator gar. Picture a freshwater predator up to 8 feet long, weighing more than 300 pounds, with a long snout packed with 2 rows of teeth and a body wrapped in hard diamond-shaped scales. This is an ancient animal. Alligator gar have swum these waters since before the dinosaurs disappeared. For most of that time, they sat at the top of the food chain in the rivers of the American South and Midwest, eating whatever came within reach. Then people wiped them out. They saw a giant toothy fish and called it trash. For decades, fishermen and landowners across the Midwest shot it, netted it, and left the bodies rotting on the bank. On top of that, the massive construction of levees and dams along the larger rivers cut the gar off from the shallow backwaters and flooded swamps where it needs to spawn. The alligator gar does not reproduce in the main channel. It needs those slow, weedy floodplain areas to lay its eggs. Wall off the floodplain, and you wall off the next generation. No spawning habitat means no reproduction. The gar vanished from the northern rivers, one state at a time, decade by decade. In Illinois, the last known wild alligator gar was pulled from the water in 1966, down in the Cache River Basin in the southern part of the state. By 1994, the Illinois DNR made it official and declared the species extinct within its borders. Then the state decided to bring it back. Starting in 2010, the Illinois Department of Natural Resources began releasing young alligator gar into state waters in coordination with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The fish were raised at the USFWS private John Allen National Fish Hatchery in Tupelo, Mississippi, from broodstock collected in the lower Mississippi River each spring. By 2025, the IDNR had stocked 21,665 alligator gar into 12 water bodies across Illinois, according to the department's own stocking records. The fish were returning to rivers they had not inhabited in over half a century. Now put the two stories in the same room: a native predator big enough to swallow another fish whole, coming back to the exact rivers that a foreign invader had just taken over. People did the obvious math: bring back the biggest predator in the river and let it eat the carp. The idea moved fast. In 2016, Illinois lawmakers voted on the record that the alligator gar was the one native fish large enough to consume an adult Asian carp. Bring back the gar, fix the river, cost almost nothing. The Associated Press ran the story nationwide. The headlines sold the gar as the weapon that would take the river back. There was one problem. The people who actually raised these fish and put them in the water said it was not going to work. Dan Stevenson, then the chief of the IDNR Division of Fisheries, whose crews bred the gar and released them, said the stocking program had nothing to do with Asian carp. The goal was restoring a native species that had been wiped out and giving anglers a trophy fish to chase. He said it plainly: the gar will have no meaningful effect on the carp population. And when you look at the numbers, you see why. From 2010 to 2013, Illinois stocked about 6,000 alligator gar. Most of them died young. Only around 1,500 grew big enough to survive in the wild. Hold 1,500 fish up against the carp. The carp in the Illinois River are not counted individually. They are measured in tons per river mile. A few thousand gar spread across hundreds of miles of water is not a predator force. It is a rounding error. On top of that, a fully grown silver carp is a heavy fish, well over a foot long. An alligator gar can only swallow prey up to the width of its own mouth. It can take a carp during its first few months of life, while the fish is still small. After that, the carp outgrows the gar's gape and swims away untouched. The gar can nibble at the edge of one spawning class and nothing more. The biologist said this over and over, for years. Nobody wanted to hear it. A boring answer never beats a good monster story. The gar stayed the hero in everyone's imagination long after the data said it could not be, so the fish everyone pinned their hopes on turned out to be a dead end. Not because the gar is not a remarkable animal. It is. It is just the wrong tool for this particular job. But here is the part that kept this from becoming a depressing story. The carp near Starved Rock really were declining. The numbers really were falling year after year. That was not fiction. It just had nothing to do with the ancient fish on the posters. Two things were pushing the carp back, and neither one made headlines. The first one is unglamorous by design. Illinois started paying people to fish the carp out. The state hired commercial fishermen, handed them nets, and put a bounty on the catch. Haul a carp out of the water and get paid by the pound, plus an extra incentive on top. The crews went hard, because now every carp in the net was cash. The technique they used was borrowed from Chinese commercial fishing and adapted by researchers at the U.S. Geological Survey. It is called the Modified Unified Method. Crews stretch block nets across a section of water, dividing it into cells. Then they use electrofishing boats and vessels outfitted with underwater speakers to drive the carp forward. The speakers blast sounds at frequencies that make the carp flee horizontally, while native fish tend to hide and dive. The carp are herded from cell to cell, each one smaller than the last, until the fish are packed into a tight harvest zone. Then the crews haul the entire wall of netting up at once. In trials, the method removed as much as 90% of invasive carp from targeted waters. One single operation on the Illinois River pulled 750,000 pounds of carp in a single haul. They also turned the carp against each other. Crews catch a few live fish, bolt a radio transmitter onto them, and release them back into the river. Carp swim in schools. The tagged fish swim straight back to the pack. The crews follow the radio signal right to the crowd and drop the nets on the whole group. A carp leading the hunters to its own kind. Across about 15 years, contracted crews have yanked roughly 50 million pounds of invasive carp out of the upper Illinois River alone, according to the Invasive Carp Regional Coordinating Committee's mid-2025 data. Add up every waterway in the state, and the number climbs to nearly 78 million pounds. The program is closing in on a major milestone and is on pace to cross 50 million pounds from the upper river pools by the end of this year. The crews are not just pulling fish at random. They target the leading edge of the invasion, the adult population front in the Dresden Island, Marseilles, and Starved Rock pools closest to Chicago. Kill the breeders at the front line, and you cut the next generation of eggs before they are ever laid. Fewer adults, fewer babies, less pressure on the barriers upstream. The invasion slows itself. Then Illinois tried something stranger. They tried to make Americans eat the problem, because the carp is actually a decent fish. White meat, mild taste, low in mercury, high in omega-3 fatty acids. But nobody in the United States wanted a fish called carp on their plate. The word itself carried decades of stigma, lumped in with the bottom-feeding common carp, even though silver and bighead carp are completely different species. So in June 2022, the Illinois Department of Natural Resources spent about $600,000 to rebrand it. They called it Kopi, short for copious, because there are so many of them. They lined up chefs, processors, and restaurant partners to put Kopi burgers, Kopi tacos, and Kopi po' boys on menus across the Midwest. The state applied to the FDA for an official name change. Kevin Irons, the assistant fisheries chief for the Illinois DNR, explained the logic at the launch. The carp name is so harsh that people will not even try it. Change the name, and you change the perception. It worked for the Patagonian toothfish, which nobody ate until it was rebranded as Chilean sea bass. The whole strategy was simple. If restaurants want Kopi, commercial fishermen catch more carp to sell it, and more carp come out of the river. Demand pulls the fish out of the water. The removal effort has been accelerating since the campaign launched. So that is Force 1. Human hands, fishing nets, and dinner plates dragging the carp out by the millions of pounds. Force 2 is something nobody planned and nobody put on a poster. Chicago's own pollution is helping hold the line. The adult carp climbing the Illinois River hit a wall somewhere around the Kankakee area, roughly 50 miles from Lake Michigan, and they have been stalled there for more than a decade. Scientists noticed this and went looking for why. Corey Susky, a professor of natural resources and environmental sciences at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, led a study published in Scientific Reports in October 2024 that tested the answer directly. His team trucked water from the stretch of the Illinois River north of Kankakee, where the Chicago area waterway flows south, to a USGS fish hatchery. They dropped young silver carp into that water and compared their behavior to fish placed in clean laboratory water. The results were immediate. Fish in clean water swam around, explored, moved normally. Fish placed in the Chicago-sourced water went sluggish almost instantly. They reduced activity, stopped moving, and showed metabolic changes consistent with physiological stress. Their bodies were burning extra energy just to cope with the contaminants. An earlier study from the same lab had found that wild silver carp living closer to Chicago were switching on genes associated with toxin removal and switching off genes tied to DNA repair. The water north of Kankakee carries volatile organic compounds, pharmaceuticals, and a range of industrial contaminants that drop off sharply at that one stretch. South of that line, the carp thrive. North of it, they shut down. Decades of Chicago's wastewater and industrial runoff built an invisible chemical wall, and the carp choose not to cross it. Susky made an important point in the study that adds a layer most people do not consider. Water quality in the Chicago area waterway has been improving. Native fish are returning to sections of the Chicago River and its tributaries. That is good for the ecosystem in general. But it also means the chemical barrier that has been holding the carp back could weaken. Amy Schneider, the study's lead author, warned that if water quality improves enough, the carp could push upstream into territory they have never reached. The very thing Chicago should be proud of, cleaner water, could be the thing that lets the carp through. That is not a reason to stop cleaning the water. It is a reason to finish the wall at Brandon Road before the chemistry changes. And that brings it all back to where the story hangs right now. Stack it up. The commercial removal program is pulling millions of pounds of carp out every year, and the populations in the upper river are measurably declining. The Kopi rebranding is creating market demand that finances more removal. The pollution south of Chicago has been acting as an accidental chemical barrier for more than a decade. No silver or bighead carp were captured or even observed in the Chicago area waterway system during intensive monitoring sweeps conducted in both May 2025 and May 2026, according to the Invasive Carp Regional Coordinating Committee. A handful of individual carp have slipped past the barriers over the years, one in 2010, one in 2017, one in 2022, each caught within a few miles of the lake. But crews searched hard every time and found no breeding population. Single fish, never a foothold. Line it all up, and the thing holding the carp back is not a monster with teeth. It is people getting paid to net fish, diners ordering Kopi tacos, and a city's own dirty water doing the rest. No ancient predator saved the day. No single machine sealed the door. What is working is a patchwork of human effort, economic incentive, and accidental chemistry held together by funding that has to be renewed every single year. And that is the fragile part, because the whole system only works as long as somebody keeps paying for it. The state harvest incentive program that puts bounties on carp requires annual funding. The contracted commercial fishing crews pulling millions of pounds from the upper pools depend on federal and state grants. And the permanent barrier at Brandon Road, the one piece of infrastructure designed to seal the door to Lake Michigan for good, is sitting under a stop work order with no public timeline for when construction will resume. Stop the money and the nets come out of the water, pull the fishermen off the river, and the carp breed back to full strength within a few spawning seasons. One female still drops over 1 million eggs a year. The lower Illinois River is still thick with carp. They still own those stretches. The removal program has pushed them back in the north, but it has not eliminated them. It has created a pressure gradient, heavy removal near Chicago, declining pressure the further south you go. Take the pressure off the top and the gradient reverses. The carp come back north. The alligator gar is still going into the water. The IDNR stocks it every year, and the fish are spreading back into their historic range, showing up on anglers' lines, growing in rivers where they have not been seen in more than half a century. Over 21,000 have been stocked since the program began. It is a genuine conservation success, a native giant coming home to the rivers that people wiped it out of a lifetime ago. That part of the story is real, and it matters. It is just a separate story from the one about the carp. So the carp are dropping for two reasons. Not one ancient predator, not one grand engineering solution. Human crews pulling them out by the millions of pounds, and a chemical wall of contaminated water that the fish refuse to swim through. Neither one is permanent. Neither one survives a budget cut or a water quality improvement without something else taking its place. The Brandon Road barrier was supposed to be that something else. It was the plan that did not depend on a bounty check or a city's dirty water. Finish it and the door closes for good. Leave it unfinished, and everything else has to keep working perfectly every single year, with no gaps, no lapses, and no budget freezes. For 40 million people and a fishery worth over $5 billion, the margin of error is exactly zero. The nets are still in the water. The fishermen are still getting paid, the carp are still out there, and the wall that was supposed to end this is still a construction site with a stop work order taped to the fence. If you want to know what happens when that order gets lifted, or if it does not, subscribe. We will be covering it.